Right. Now we are going to discuss failures of the government. Earlier we considered market economy. How does market economy work? Therein after government had to intervene to make it correct. But government intervention into the market can mislead allocation of resources. In other words, there is a further failures or inefficiencies in the market, even though government intervenes to avoid market failures. Such a situation is called government failure. So number of reasons can be seen over here. First of all, government wanted to control market prices of certain goods. For instance, prices of rice. If the price of rice is controlled, government had to employ number of people to observe whether controlled prices are going on or not. In such a case, high administration cost can be seen. So it is a one-off failure. High administration cost is a government failure. Too much of expenses when the government want to correct these matters. Even political issues can be seen if resources are controlled by the government side. So number of failures even added here. First of all, when the government intervention to avoid market failures create further inefficiencies in the economy without providing this desired outcome because of weakness or inherent in the public sector. That is referred to as government failure. There are several reasons for failure of the government. So it says there, next one, political selfishness, acting for the personal interest of public officials. So in that case, government officials may not have proper work. In other words, they do not allocate, they do not provide best service for the everyone. In other, they do concentrate personal interest instead of considering everyone in the society. Best example, when someone is employed for a government sector, people, such an officers in the government sector concentrate their personal interest rather than the efficiency of candidate. So that's how many government sectors in the country are completely a mess, in other words, inefficient. So they look at personal interest. That's what first one says. Increase in administrative expenses. As I told you, too much of cost for the employing resources. Sometimes when the government exists, they do allocate larger resources for the production than the official way, than the required amount. So too much, because the government officers do not need to manage their resources, government resources, because they are given salary or wage. Then inefficiency occurs, as well as administrative cost, regulation expenses, rules and regulation, and everything. Avoiding government interference, attempt by certain individual and institution to hide from government rules and regulations. In here, government would have introduced number of rules and regulation, whereas the production in the economy is not at a good way. In other words, government may not have production great output into the country, or else government interference will not concentrate how to capture all the things from the society. So they have a somewhat loose, in other words, insufficient legislations or as rules. As a result, it doesn't properly capture. Next one, firmness in government of firmness in the government operations, failure of change in government-based policies according to the dynamic environment. Here, the dynamic environment can be considered as a main weakness. So here, failure occurs due to number of policies. Some policies are there, concentrate short-term phenomenon rather than long-term success. What does that mean? Firms, government sector often concentrate their next election rather than utilizing the resources properly. So they do have limited or scope. They concentrate smaller area. As a result, resources are not efficiently used. Finally, after that, it says the role of the government in the market economy. Simply, government should play a vital role in the market economy. Actually, market failure since price mechanism fails to allocate resources efficiently. Then what are the things here? Number of failures we can identify: non-provision of public goods, under-provision, merit goods, over-provision of demerit goods, information failure, sometimes externalities. These are number of failures in a the market economy. So government should play a vital role how to overcome this matter. Then the government should distribute resources efficiently. If resources are not sufficient for public goods, government has to provide it. So it says the government implement the following measures to prevent inefficiency of resource allocation in the market economy. Encouraging consumption of welfare items. In this case, may include number of welfare items since government supports. Malnutrition is a one of problem in developing world or developing countries. Then government has to provide number of facilities for certain families. Then people can get all the stuffs given by the government, then they can get out from that matter. So government in this case encourage such a consumption of welfare items, remove it or to avoid malnutrition. Then the next one, supply of public good. Public good sense things we commonly use like national defense, street lighting. These are not provided by the private sector because no profit for the private sector. These are missing in the market. Then government should provide such public goods because they collect taxes from general public. They are enough to supply quasi-public goods. What does quasi-public good mean? Semi-public. There are highways, sometimes libraries, gardens, playgrounds. These are conducted by the government. Quasi-public good sense, there is a entrance fee. Therein after people can enjoy whatever they need. So these are quasi-public goods, but these public goods even not adequate when the private sector exists. For example, we haven't seen private libraries because it's always done by the government sector. So it is important for everyone. Then government has a rule, government has a policy to supply. Restriction of supply of demerit. Demerit goods are things which can affect the society adversely. So this may include alcohol, cigarette, and those. So definitely consumption can create external cost to the rest of the society. These tasks must be controlled. They introduce, imposing taxes or legislations to cut supply of demerit goods. Thereafter, I added here equitable distribution of income and wealth. When the private sector exists, they earn money based on the resources what they have. So equitable distribution of income can be seen if the government exists into the economy. If the government exists into the economy, why is that? When the government exists, they do charge taxes from the rich and distribute such an income to the poor. So redistribution of income, since income inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor is reduced. If so, people in the society are having common or a particular level of income, then people will not suffer. Otherwise, certain group of the market are enjoying, can say, excel in their life. But other group are, of course, having a hardship. It's quite difficult to manage. Then government has a responsibility to overcome such income inequalities. Then here the following measures implemented by the government to establish equity in the market economy. Land reforms, establishment of income and wealth distribution, setting restrictions on wealth accumulation. So number of land reforms, simply restrictions are there. No one can purchase many lands, like particular rules and regulation. Establishment of income and wealth distribution, as I told you, collecting taxes and distributing on the poor. In Sri Lanka, of course, samurdhi for the poor, as well as pension for the certain group as a universal benefit. Next one, setting restrictions on wealth accumulation. If some people gather many resources, assets, it should be overcome. Next, establish macroeconomic stability. What does macroeconomic stability sense? Controlling countries' price fluctuation and changes in employment rate. So economic stability is very essential. If people have, if the price of goods are more stable, in other words, if the government can avoid inflation and deflation, so people have stable prices always. It is very important objective. Some countries like Japan has exhibited that feature many years, like 10, 15 years back. They had the prices as same today's price. So prices should be stable, then economy will have a better production in future. Even people should have employment continuously. So by control inflation and unemployment through application of fiscal policy, government maintains macroeconomic stability. Here fiscal policy sense government policy. So government can use number of policies here to achieve their targets. Then the next one, sustainable development at last. Economy should have continuous growth, economic growth, development, better living standard, as well as protection of employee, protection of environment. If these three areas are concentrated, of course, economies can reach sustainable development. So it is one of macroeconomic objective nowadays. It works to maintain market system for stable, sustainable development through balanced improvement of economic, social and environmental sectors. These three sectors are highlighted in this case. So government policy wise, government policies are three types. First of all, we can say demand side policies. There are two: fiscal policy as well as monetary policy. So the second one, supply side policies. These are the methods of achieving government objectives. First of all, fiscal policy. Fiscal policy and instruments or tools. Fiscal policy includes two instruments. What are the instruments here? Government spending and taxes. Government spending and taxes. So if the government spending and taxes are changed, government can achieve their objectives. There are two types: contractionary fiscal policy, expansionary. Contractionary sense, taxes reduced, there enough spending increase. Spending increase. So these are the instruments for contractionary policies, spending increase. Then the expansionary. I do minor change here. Expansionary, taxes reduce, spending increase. Contractionary, taxes increase and spending decrease. Spending decrease. So neutral, of course, there is no gap between taxes and spending. Taxes equal to spending. So both taxes and spending belong to government's budget. Even nowadays, Sri Lankan government implemented budget. So it says further, changes made and measures taken in relation to government expenditure, taxation, and borrowing to achieve macroeconomic goals are referred to as fiscal policies. These policies used to achieve sustainable economy and reduce poverty. The fiscal policy in terms of economic need can be classified into three main forms. They are contractionary, expansionary, neutral. Contractionary means countries' aggregate demand is reduced. AD reduces. Then expansionary sense, AD increases. This is how the meanings of expansionary and contractionary. AD reduces. Expansionary, AD increases. So these are the tools. So government can, in this case, implement budget, as I told you. Government, budget is a document presented by the government annually, spells out fiscal policy stance of the government for that particular year, and therefore the government's fiscal policy is referred to as budgetary policy. as well, budgetary policy as well. Government fiscal policy consists of two parts, and they are government expenditure, that means spending, government revenue, sense taxes. Then first of all, government expenditure. So government expenditure is very important in which macroeconomic objectives can be achieved. Expenditure in two types: recurrent expenditure, capital expenditure. Recurrent means the expenditure for day-to-day expenses. Compulsorily, government should spend, and the benefit of the recurrent expenditure belongs to the period what they have incurred. But capital expenditure, on the other hand, represent the expenditure on investment. The benefit of capital expenditure belongs to future generation too. It will benefit entire society in the future as well. For example, recurrent expenditure sense wages. Government sector workers are paid wages as recurrent expenditure. So wages monthly, such a amount only for the period they have work, not for the future. But capital expenditure like construction of a road is constructed, but the amount what they spend will benefit the economy in the future as well. So particular benefits towards the country in the future. That's the major difference. So further, recurrent expenditure except government spending on acquiring real assets used in the production processes for more than 1 year, and also capital transfers. All other payments are considered as recurrent expenditure. There are three major types of recurrent expenditure. Simply, recurrent expenditure means expenditure on day-to-day expenses, expenditure on day-to-day government expenses, which will benefit only the period what they have incurred. So the recurrent expenditure includes three types: recurrent expenditure on goods and services, interest payment, recurrent transfer, and subsidies. Then after capital expenditure, as I told you, investment expenditure of the government sector. So capital expenditure, known as the cost incurred to support the acquisition of fixed assets, benefits of which go beyond the period during which the given cost has to be borne. Expenditure on capital enhances government's capital stock, enabling the country to achieve higher economic growth. There are two types of capital expenditure. They are expenditure on acquiring real assets. Next, capital transfers. There are two types: expenditure of acquiring real assets and capital transfers. These are the two expenses under capital expenditure. Next, government revenue. So government revenue means tax revenue. It's a major component, like 90% approximately is tax revenue of the total income or revenue of the government. So it says income generated by the state through various means in order to fulfill different tasks of the government is referred to as government revenue. There are two major sources through which government collects tax revenue. First one, tax revenue, and non-tax revenue as well. So this is the page I selected from Central Bank Annual Report. Here the fiscal policy and government expenditure, composition of government revenue. This is how tax revenue and non-tax revenue is classified. Tax revenue is 9%, import duties, VAT, other taxes, income taxes, excise duties. Then other side, non-tax revenue, profits and dividend, rent and interest income, fees and charges, including other. So this is the structure of revenue of the government. So likewise, revenue is categorized into two: tax revenue, non-tax revenue. Thereafter, the impact of fiscal policy on business activities. So fiscal policy include taxes and spending. If the government charge higher taxes, businesses may have less profit, then businesses are discouraged. If the government reduces taxes, businesses are encouraged. As well as government spending. If the government spend more on the economy, people will have better income. Even government purchases many goods and services. As a result, businesses will have better revenue. They are encouraged to produce more and more. So actually, government should implement expansionary fiscal policy when there is a recession in the economy. Recession means country's output is low. It can be overcome, or economy can get out from a recession when there is an expansionary fiscal policy. As well as in certain cases, prices are very high, price level is high, then government wants to cut down price level. Then what does the government do now? Reducing aggregate demand. Then contractionary fiscal policy must be used. So such a description included all the details here. As well as whenever the government spend more and more, budget may imply a deficit. Deficit since spending is greater than the tax revenue. Then the government should borrow money. If the government borrow, it is another cost, because government has to pay interest in future as well. Then government budget, direct and indirect taxes. Taxes are two types: direct tax, indirect tax. So government should charge particular taxes in order to collect revenue, and they can spend money on the economy. Government budget may imply a deficit, sometimes a surplus, sometimes balanced. So budget means a particular estimate for the future financial year that the government is going to spend and the amount that the government is going to collect. And article, or we can say estimate, is said to be a budget. So budget is introduced by the finance minister. Then it should be passed through the parliament. Then it becomes a law. So it says here, the state budget is the report that will presented to parliament and passed through parliament on the expected expenditure that will have to be incurred by the government in coming year, and means raising money to cover the expenses. It reflects the government fiscal plan and the vision. In the state budget balances are obtained by matching government revenue and government expenditure. And three main budget concepts can be identified according to the nature of the budget balance. They are: deficit means greater spending than the revenue. Excess or surplus, revenue is greater than the spending. Then the balanced budget, expenditure is equal to the revenue. So actually, budget is implemented through appropriation bill. This is the first draft of the budget. In other words, budget should be read out 3 times or thrice in the parliament. Then only it becomes a budget. Then the first time it is appropriation bill. This is where government make a particular estimate for the future year for by allocating particular finances for government departments, corporations, for their expenses. Right. It says here, a draft appropriation bill is the bill that specifies the amount of revenue to be allocated to departments and ministries for the coming year, and how funds will be financed if there is a gap between revenue and expense. Even when there is a gap, it should be settled. It is mentioned by the appropriation bill. Then the supplementary estimate. This is about a particular excess expenditure, or certain ministries may need further or somehow more finances than the amount allocated by the appropriation bill or the budget in between the financial period. So the relevant ministry should implement expected finance or particular amount what they are going to collect from the approved from the parliament. Then a particular draft must be presented for the parliament in order to get the approval and finance from the treasurer, government treasurer. So it is called supplementary estimate. Supplementary estimate is the estimate submitted by the minister of relevant ministry to obtain approval of parliament of new finance requirement after appropriation bill is passed. Simply now here in this year, even we came to know for the 2022 health ministry wanted more amount than they allocated, so need particular greater finances. Then such a ministry should represent or introduce supplementary estimate. Next one, vote on account. This is actually in some cases unforeseen events may occur in the country. All in sudden there would be a war, sometimes natural disaster. Then parliament cannot be gathered in order to prepare a budget for the next financial year. Typically October-November period in every year, prepare a budget for the next financial period. If such a period is not good, like October-November, these months is not better to gather parliament members, what do? They cancel appropriation bill or is the budget in order to avoid that matter. So then it says there, the vote on account sense emergence. For this case of emergencies, government prepare a particular bill in order to pass government expenses. I mean, ministries or corporations expenses should be bared by the government, or particular finance should be allocated from the from the treasurer of the government. So then, for the purpose of distributing government funds to each and every ministry, then government prepare vote on account in case of emergencies if they are unable to prepare a budget. Right. It says here in the case if there is an unforeseen occurrence and if it is not presented to parliament within the stipulated time frame until the pass through the parliament, the vote of account is used as temporary document to get funds from consolidated fund. Here consolidated sense government treasurer for the expenditures which need to be borne by the relevant ministry. So this is for particular emergencies, unexpected events, when sometimes natural disasters, sometimes war, or even pandemic occurred. Then parliament members couldn't gather, then they do not prepare a budget. Likewise, whatever the incident, it is called vote on account. So this is the lesson we studied today.